Michael McKay, and with me is Zoe Russell, our special commentator, and our special guest today, Dr. Paul Cleveland. So, Paul, you were just going in and talking about the differences between freedom and liberty, and, you know, the popular notion of freedom and liberty is that we can do whatever we want without enduring the consequences of our behavior. What's wrong with that notion?
Well, the problem with that is that somebody is going to bear the consequence of poor action. And Frederick Bastiat, in his book Economic Harmonies, pointed out that, you know, if it's the person who's acting who bears responsibility for poor action, then they have enough motive to change behavior and to adjust what they're doing. However, if I can shift the consequences of my own actions to somebody else, then I can pursue it with impunity over the long term, or at least conceivably so for a while. Now, it always has detrimental effects in society that eventually catch up with you, you know. And we've been on this path. We've slowly been allowing people to shift onto taxpayers the burdens of their poor choices in life, and or their mismanagement of property and that sort of thing. In the most recent example, the banking bailouts. Well, why shouldn't the businesses fail? I mean, what's too big to fail? If they make poor choices, they ought to live with their poor choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Well, you know, one of the things that was very fascinating to me in your book is how you connected this this notion of people trying to escape the consequences of their behavior with both the welfare and the warfare state. Could you explain how these are connected?
Oh, sure. Well, as you know, as we've moved away, as government has begun to shift itself away from its primary duty, namely the protection of each individual's life, liberty, and property, and as it's become, you know, part of the welfare side of it was the government's going to take care of everybody, or this sort of utopian vision that the progressive movement and various socialists had, called various collectivists, that somehow the government can provide, you know, or redistribute the property from one person to another and do so effectively. Well, one, it just won't work. You know, it's built upon the presumption that people continue to do that, which you know, they have no incentive to do eventually, and so that's the welfare side of it, and of course the warfare side of it. Once you go down that, you're really pitting people against one another, and if we do it internationally, we're pitting one nation against another nation, and we're promoting, you know, worldwide instability in that sense.
You know, you make the point that the average person is actually made a slave of the political elites, and I think a lot of people feel that way. They feel very frustrated that, you know, no matter what is happening. I mean, I think it's pretty pervasive that most Americans feel that these bailouts are pretty stupid. They recognize that they are actually holding the bag, that they're passing it forward to their children, and yet they feel rather helpless, you know, in this kind of political hostage situation that they are.
Right. Well, this has all happened very slowly, you know. It was the progressive movement. They embraced the kind of socialism of Karl Marx, but they wanted to bring it about in this sort of gradual method, you know, an evolutionary means of achieving the end, and so they played upon probably the worst passions in the human heart, which are, you know, obvious to us all: jealousy, envy, and greed. Mm-hmm. You know, if you looked at the original income tax, well, the first rate was 1%. Mm-hmm. And now, if we'd adjusted that for inflation, if that code were still in place, well, if you were a single individual, you wouldn't even pay income tax at all if you made less than something like $55,000 a year. If you were a married couple, you wouldn't pay any income tax if you made less than $75,000. And then you would only pay 1% for taxable income from that point up to the next $350,000. So most people thought, well, this isn't really going to apply to me. It's only those rich people out there that are going to pay.
Right.
And, and so you can really play upon that, upon people's kind of natural greed and jealousy and envy of others. If there's successful businessmen like Ford or Rockefeller, these sorts of individuals, people felt, oh, okay, well, it's okay to go take it from them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're not going to take that much because the top marginal rate at the time was only 7% initially, but it quickly adjusted up. Later after World War I with Woodrow Wilson, who was, really attacked private property fairly ruthlessly.
Let's go back a minute. One of the things I really liked is that you set up some basic stepping stone understandings for the establishment of private property. Okay. And you mentioned that there are only a few ways that people can obtain what they want. Make it for themselves, trade for it, using something to trade that they have or that they make, receive it as a gift, or stealing it, from others. And so that's the fourth one, stealing it from others. Is it possible? I mean, economically, it's impossible for everyone to steal from everyone else.
Oh, exactly. As a matter of fact, when I teach my principles classes, I'll kind of lay those out and point out that really only the first two are economic. In other words, only production and trade are economic. But the other two, charity and theft, are not economic because they cannot be generalized. And you're quite right. As long as I'm the only thief out there and everybody else is out busy producing stuff, and, I can go let myself into their homes and pilfer what I want. But if everyone tries to do it and nobody produces anything, then there's nothing to steal, and we all starve to death. That's why socialism always fails, because socialism is nothing but a system of organized theft orchestrated by government. And so it can never work. It eventually always fails because it's enticing people to play a game that's an unwinnable game. Charity likewise requires prior production. Before you can give anything away, you have to have something to give.
Right, and if you need producers, you therefore need savers.
Right, exactly. Is precisely the point. And so, from that point on, what I'll do is I'll hold my students' feet to the fire, because I'll say, if we want to talk economics, then we're talking production and trade. Mm-hmm. Now, if you want to talk about theft, then, we can deal with that too, and show the effects of it every time out.
Mm. Well, you make the point that we need private property rights, but are these natural, or do they occur only because governments provide them to us?
Well, property itself is generated naturally. I mean, if you think about it for a moment, if we go back in history, people are physical creatures. We need to eat, we need to drink water, we need shelter and clothing, these sorts of things. Well, we have to produce. I mean, there's no other way to get it. There are things out there in the world that we can co-opt and we can use. If I go out and I'm hungry and pick berries off a bush, well, they're my berries. They become my property. Or if I cultivate a blackberry bush, it becomes my bush because I'm the one raising it, tending it, bringing it to fruition for a purpose that I have in mind. So property is something that we naturally create, and if you think about it, as we progress, we're not going to progress well if we just try to produce everything we want for ourselves. We do better when we specialize and trade with one another. Mm-hmm. And we can accomplish so much more that way. That's why we do it. but there are always people who want to do the shortcut and just take it what they want from somebody else by force or fraud. So law, the need for law came about because people have been so willing throughout human history to violate the property of others.
Mm-hmm.
So, that is kind of a central theme in my book and in my work.
It is. It's an essential basic point. Also, explain this basic need to trade you just mentioned. Why private property? Why is private property fundamental to the economic success?
Well, you can't. You can't trade what you don't possess. But so private property, I just think is part of our nature. It's who we are. And it's what we create when we interact with the world in order to survive. And it's why John Locke wrapped it up with the other two, the right to life and the right to liberty, coexist with the right to property. They're intertwined. You can't drop one without dropping the other two.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So they exist as a whole fabric, and not really separate at all. And it would be an illusion to think that property could be held in common somehow. It certainly can't be used in common. I remember they got some communal bicycles at Birmingham-Southern, and that lasted for about 3 weeks before they began to disappear.
Okay, we're going to come back to that point right after the break. I'm sorry I have to interrupt you right now, Paul, but we're going to take a quick break. Please stay with us. This is Radio Free Market, and I'm your host, Michael McKay, and we'll be back in just a minute.